We Talk Fantasy, Gozilla Media's fantasy football podcast is championship week is concluded. Some of you are bragging about your championship for the next 12 months. Others are sitting with hoods over their head in despair with their hair looking wild and sad, like you might see on our visual side now. Kyle Ray, Chet Davis, join us. I'm just going to pull up the nice graphic here on the bottom left of our YouTube channel. Are you a champion? Ray, we'll start with you. We'll start with you before we get to the man at the bottom there. A thumbs down like Dave Bautista in the WWE. No championships for you this season.
No championships. Got a third, missed the playoffs, and I was unable to surgically repair 2 ACLs, broken shoulders, and a broken neck in that Yahoo League. So no championships for you, boy. Definitely made some bad draft decisions that I thought might pay out in a year that we thought running backs would be a hot commodity and would be in big need. Didn't end up working out for me. Missed the playoffs there by just one game. And then my Dynasty League, which I was strong, thought was by far one of the better teams I've put together. Just didn't work out. Got the cove and lost to the man below me. But it wouldn't have mattered because I'll let Chet go.
Chet, go right ahead, my friend.
To answer the question, yes, but I don't feel like a champion. With the 10-team experiment, one confirmed championship team in a Yahoo League. Should have been 2, but that Najee Harris touchdown on the last drive cost me the league. Yep. Lost by 6 points, and the guy only had Najee left. And that touchdown, was it a 40-yarder almost?
37-yarder, yep.
Yeah. So that cost me in that league, which I was okay with. Some crappy things happened where I had Ronald Jones in that league. He obviously left early with the injury against the Jets. I think on my bench, I want to say I don't think I had Rashad Penny, but there was another running back that I could have played over Ronald Jones that was kind of split. Oh, maybe Elijah Mitchell, I think, was the one I decided between Elijah and Rojo, and I went with the healthier back. Ironically, it didn't pan out. And then, as we've talked about before, the ESPN leagues that are public, I don't know why they're allowing it to go to week 18 with the 2-week format. One of those, it looks like I'm going to win. I'm up by 30. The other one, I'm down by like 60. So I think that one's going to be an L. That one also included Rojo, some other injuries as well that the team just kind of fell apart.
Chet, quick question on that. Are the lineups locked or can you readjust them this week?
You can readjust.
Okay.
Yep. So you can try to figure out what the hell to do for week 18, which we'll discuss later is going to be, for the most part, teams are going to have to play because seeding is still very much open. I think the only team that doesn't really have to is the Packers, and there's going to be a lot of fantasy players involved there. But we'll dive into that later. As for the Dynasty League that Kyle mentioned, I'm okay. I'm okay because, and you guys want me to go on the full rant now?
Yes.
Send it.
You guys already have read most of it. I'm actually going to start with this. I'm going to ask a question. Kyle, I want you to look at me virtually through the lens of this podcast. Were you rooting for me to lose?
No, I really wasn't. I was just trolling.
Mm-hmm. You're not happy that I lost?
Not really. Gardner said it. Gardner, sorry, buddy. You said a shit lineup. You got ungodly lucky. Ungodly.
Yeah. So for people, and maybe we'll post the lineup matchup and show people what we're talking about. You give us a follow on _talk_fantasy, I believe is the Twitter handle.
That's right.
So Gardner made an improbable run to the championship. He's a team that lost Derrick Henry midway through the year and was absolutely carried by one Cooper Kupp. That probably we can all agree at this point, fantasy MVP. I still think Jonathan Taylor's in the conversation, but Cooper Kupp is having a historic season. For 17 games, for 18 games, he's been unbelievably consistent. So Cooper Kupp carries them into the championship. The amazing thing is, after losing Derrick Henry, he didn't do anything to salvage losing Derrick Henry. He has been rolling with, for most of the season, his second running back was Ty Johnson. of the Jets.
Ooh.
And recently, after I told him that that was a horrible RB2, he picks up Dontrell Hilliard, who, for all intents and purposes, is like option 2B for the Titans. Not even the full backup, because, they have Jeremy McNichols. And so Hilliard's his guy there. After Cooper Kupp, the wide receivers he's been rolling with is Mooney for the Bears and Jerry Jeudy for the Broncos. So to set up this picture, I see the deficiencies in his lineup. And so for this entire championship week, I was blocking the great options on the waiver wire, the Boston Scotts, the Jared Patterson after Antonio Gibson gets COVID. On the wide receiver side, Russell Gage, MVS, Alan Lazard, bunch of guys that he could have chosen from. He doesn't check his fantasy lineup until Sunday. Let me say that again. He is in a championship and doesn't open his lineup until Sunday. I have probably opened the lineup 100 times from Wednesday to Sunday. And he decides, you know what? I'm not going to add anybody. I'm just going to promote Kendrick Bourne to my flex, and I'm going to keep Hilliard at RB2. I'm dancing. I'm ecstatic that he's made this decision. Well, at the end of the 1:00 games, Hilliard, and I believe I want to say it was 28-3 lead for the Titans over the Dolphins. Under 2 minutes to play, Hilliard breaks off a 50-yard touchdown run. So a 5-point fantasy performance bumps up to 15. Also in the Patriots game, with a 50-3 lead on the Jacksonville Jaguars, with Brian Hoyer under center, Kendrick Bourne gets 2 receptions for 50 yards. That's a 6-point swing. Why the F are we throwing the ball up 50-3 on a running team? Like, this is a Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson. What are we doing? So that swing, took out a lot of the air on my, chances of winning. But there were still other moments. How about the pick six that was almost there with, I'm going to draw a blank on the DB's name. It was for the Patriots. He had the Kyle Duggar. Interception, gets pushed out at the 1-yard line by a lineman. Like, wasn't that crazy? We're trying to intercepted it at the 20 and gets pushed out at the 1. And just to fast forward to the end, I lost this matchup by 4 points. So I just needed one touchdown somewhere, or removing the Kendrick Bourne 40-yard reception. DeAndre Swift tackled at the 1 on a dive play. Also, Jamal Williams gets a 1-yard touchdown. How about Amon-Ra St. Brown with a 25-yard touchdown run? F you, Dan Campbell. If you're listening, I'm going to eat your kneecaps, you bum. Why lie to us? Your season's over. Cut him loose. He barely played. And when he did, he had a nice 30-yard run. And the explosion was that. To read that matchup correctly, the Detroit Lions going up against a bad Seahawks team, I made the tough call of DeAndre Swift over Cordero Patterson. I was 50% right. Cordero didn't do much against the Bills. Mike Davis had the better game. And to just see the amount of points that were scored in that Lions game and for Swift to not be involved was a backbreaker. I did have A.J. Dillon on my bench, thought about playing him. But really, it was between Cordero and DeAndre Swift. That was the tough decision I made. It was 50% right. Some other plays that happened. So I mentioned DeAndre Swift. I mentioned the Patriots defense. How about Gardner starting the Giants defense and getting 2 second-half interceptions on Andy Dalton? It went from they were down to 3 points and finished with 8. Yes, that's 5 points. That's the difference between me winning and losing in the championship. Aaron Jones not getting one of those touchdowns that A.J. Dillon got both of them in the second half. It was just one of those, and that's why I'm okay with it, where holy shit, everything had to fall right for him. He put up a season high. Let me remind you, he had Derrick Henry and Cooper Kupp healthy at one point this season. He puts up a season high 121 points with Dontrell Hilliard and Kendrick Bourne. I don't know what else to say. Another thing I sent you guys a screenshot of. I made 80 transactions in 4 trades to salvage a championship-worthy team. This is a team that lost J.K. Dobbins in the preseason, lost A.J. Brown for a majority of the season. Jalen Hurts I could go through a bevy of interceptions, of injuries that I had to deal with.
Interceptions.
And a lot of interceptions. Gardner didn't do a single trade and had less than 20 transactions throughout the season, and he wins. And maybe he has a crystal ball. Maybe he read that. I know I could go on and on and on about how that happened. He ended up being the highest scoring team of the semifinal teams, so it wasn't even that fluky. Even though he should have lost in the semis, if my brother
no, he should have lost in the first round.
I mean,
winning with 95 points.
Correct. So there's a lot of things that shouldn't have happened the way it did, but that's how the ball rolled, and I'm just going to shake my head. What are you going to do? Lost by 3 points. Deontay Johnson had 1 million targets on Monday Night Football, only got 30 yards, and it got the great touchdown that I needed. If you told me going into that game that Deontay Johnson was going to have 8 receptions and a touchdown, I would say, I did it. I won. Only had 30 yards. Big Ben can't throw the ball downfield. Get the hell out of Heinz Field. Congrats on winning your last game. Get the hell out of town. Retire. It's over. It stings, and that's fantasy football.
I have to admit, I thought at one point while you were recapping this championship that you were going to drop the name of Joe Burrow or Jamar Chase. See, that's what I think. I feel as if more fantasy managers might have had a similar story to you where they're talking about a 7, an 8, a 6 seed if you have expanded playoffs, depending on how low, a lower than a top tier team making a run like you talked about with Gardner's team because of Cooper Kupp. Joe Burrow's historic back-to-back weeks. Jamar Chase's chase for, I guess pun intended there, a chase for an all-time great rookie season. Like those guys alone could have won you a fantasy championship. Instead, what Chet just explained was good enough. And you know what? That story you just told, that sounds like the quarterfinals. That sounds like week 15. I know we did a podcast here where we went through like the top scoring quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends in a whole different lineup of guys off the transaction and waiver wires could have led you to a championship. I hate to say it, Chet, but it almost feels like the theme of that championship is the overall theme of the playoffs in 2021. Random guys having great or good enough games and piecing your way through the title game.
Yeah, it's like, because this is the second year in a row I've finished as the runner-up in this league. And last year, I don't remember the exact details, but I lost to a really good team. Like I was an underdog going in, a team that was stacked with Lamar Jackson, Darren Waller, Stephon Diggs.
Mark Andrews on the same team.
Yeah, and so losing that one, it was expected. I don't remember being particularly close. It didn't come down to Monday night. It didn't come down to a few points. But this one, just losing to a bad team. Like I would love to see the percentage of championship teams that started Dontrell Hilliard. Like he was not even projected in the top 50. So many better options, and for him to rip off a 50-yard touchdown under 2 minutes to play in a blowout is unbelievable. It's unfathomable that he was able to pull that off.
All right, with that being said, and I don't disagree with you, by the way, that is an all-time wild, insane thing. Go ahead, Chet. Yeah.
One thing about the Hilliard performance, he outscored in this championship game. He outscored Joe Mixon. He outscored Stephon Diggs. Outscored Aaron Jones. Dontrell effing Hilliard. I can't. Just forever will just be dumbfounded that actually paid off.
It kind of circles back to what you said a few minutes ago too about what the preview is now for Week 18. And I'm going to start with Kyle for this one because if you're a fantasy manager like Chet and you want to have the take this week of, you know what, look how competitive Week 18 is going to be. We know the Packers are probably going to sit Rodgers and a bunch of their players, but across the league, you've got more than 50% of teams really fighting for playoff berths, positioning, things that are going to impact their season. Seeing what 2021/2022's Week 18 is going to be, Kyle, I'll start with you. Do we reconsider fantasy football movements, we've had this is a storyline for this whole season. Are we ready to maybe say week 18 is more impactful fantasy-wise than maybe we thought about a month ago and less fluky? So your season's not getting decided by guys like Hilliard.
I'm still not ready to say that. And the only reason being is because I think this is one of those NFL seasons that, I mean, this is the last, I can't remember an NFL season the last time that we've had this many teams still fighting for home field advantage and still fighting for that first round at home playoff game. And the whole excuse me, the whole playoff picture is just who you're going to play. I mean, when you look at the Chargers and the Raiders, if I'm not mistaken, there's a wild scenario out there. If the Steelers win, the Colts lose. If the Steelers win and the Colts lose, both the Raiders and the Chargers get into the playoffs if it ends in a tie. So the Steelers get kicked out, the Colts get kicked out, Chargers, Raiders get in if they tie. So literally the Chargers and Raiders could go up to each other at the start of the game, like, you want to take me so we both get in the playoff for the whole game to just end in a tie? So there's so many wild scenarios, but no, I still think week 17 is the way to end it. There's still plenty a lot of stuff is never going to be decided on week 17. So everybody's going to play. But I'm still not comfortable saying, like, at the beginning of the year to these managers that decide to play on week 18 again, what the hell are you doing? But there's too many unknowns at this point. Like the Colts, or excuse me, not the Colts, the Lions. I think we talked about it last week. Why the hell are you even thinking about playing DeAndre Swift? Your season is over. Bench his ass. Oh, when you also look at the Browns, I know the Browns are more than likely going to be moving on from Baker Mayfield this year. Baker Mayfield's shoulder is jacked up. Why is he playing? Get him the surgery, maybe get some trade value from him. I don't know. But those are the kind of the results that you can see in week 18. Like, I don't see any reason to ever play in week 18.
Chet, the wound is not just fresh, but it's almost still open for you. And you've got a week 18 matchup. So maybe your answer isn't ready yet. Maybe you're going to decide next week. But as of right now, how are you feeling about how the impact of week 17 makes you think about championship week?
Is the question of, like, should we include week 18?
Yeah, especially with you now in some of these ESPN leagues with it, and how you felt like it might have been a lot of fluky stuff happening in a title game weekend.
I mean, the fluky stuff, I could keep talking about Hilliard. I'm going to say Dontrell Hilliard's name probably 10 more times this podcast. But no, week 17 is the way you got to go. It always used to be week 16 before we extended the regular season. But like Kyle said, this is a rare season where I think the elimination of that second first round bye, only one first round bye, makes it much more competitive in the final week of the season, where there's still jockeying and in this case, still division titles are still on the line, looking at the Patriots and the Bills. So most of the big names are going to be out there. The only team that really doesn't have much to play for, I believe, is the Green Bay Packers. So you could see the resting of Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones. But you just never know that going into a season. Like, it easily could have been multiple teams that don't have anything to play for. And then you're left with a lot of your fantasy superstars not being available. So I always firmly believe the penultimate, to use an SAT word, the penultimate week of the regular season is the best way to go to determine your championship, because you don't have to deal with as much of the teams resting and giving guys the week off.
3 for 3. Totally agree with you guys on this. And by the way, just real quick, the Najee Harris run, if you lost on that, that's an all-timer. Like, all-time worst championship single play. Because when you're watching that play, you think he's going to go down. You think he just might fall, like Brian Westbrook is the one that always pops in my head. That he's just going to go down. He's going to let Roethlisberger get on the field and take a knee. Because that whole storyline's in the background, too, if he wants Roethlisberger to have the last whatever. But that doesn't happen. That is an all-time heartbreaker if you lost your championship. I feel for you on that, just like we feel for our guy Chet here, losing that way too. But yes, I also would even go further back and say, I would like the NFL to get rid of week 14 buys. Like, let's get rid of that nonsense, because COVID has thrown its own curveball into what the world is in the NFL. So if we're back to 14, 15, 16 next year, I'm totally cool with that. Like, I can't say I was a fan of the week 17 championship or the week 15 quarters because of the randomness of both random people having great games and impact players playing poorly. It really didn't give us the true result of who might have been the best teams. But, some would argue that's the playoffs. That's the fun of it. I would like to go back because I don't like change. 14, 15, 16.
Yeah, I could see that as well. And to go back to the, all-time way to lose, I want to say Matthew Berry is the one who retweeted it or liked it. A guy won, and you could also say a guy lost on the final kneel down. Someone, the guy who won had the Cleveland defense, and that kneel down brought them from 300 yards of offense to 299, and that gained an extra point for him to win. I mean, that is all time.
Yes.
Way to determine a championship. Because if you're the guy who has that lead, you're already celebrating. You might have already Venmo'd the championship money, and the math just worked in your favor. The 1 yard on that kneel down brought the extra points back for the Cleveland defense, which I don't know. I mean, Cleveland does get a lot of sacks. I don't think it was a great play to begin with, but holy cow, what a way to determine a championship.
And I think the funny part kind of to that is we were talking last week about teams winning you a championship. How about that Steelers defense winning you a defense? Sacks? 9 sacks, yeah. 2 picks, under 300 yards. Like that, I didn't even look. Did they hit 20 points?
No, I want to say they ended with 18.
Whoo!
Yeah.
Talk about a game changer for a championship matchup if you decided to play a terrible offensive line with the defensive player of the year on the other side of the ball.
What a way to end 2021's fantasy football season. We look forward to 2022 now. We're going to talk about some lessons we learned and changes that might be on the way. But if you're looking to make changes this year, Jared Lozier is your guy for Northeastern Insurance. If you're looking to save some cash, especially for the insurance that means something to you in your life, those really important things, give him a call today. 518-956-3753. 518-956-3753. His info right here below in our description as well. Again, your home, your business, your car, the things that are really valuable to you. Yearly, you look at the numbers and say, well, maybe I could save some cash with this plan or that plan. Have Jared Lozier shop the market for you so you can save some cash this year. It's simple and easy as that. Email him too, jaredl@nemail.com. Have somebody from Northeastern Insurance, our guy Jared, check out the market for you. And all of a sudden, at the end of the month, the end of the year, you've saved a bunch of cash because you made that move for yourself. One more time, our guy Jared Lozier, Northeastern Insurance, jaredl@nemail.com. Northeastern Insurance helping you save some cash in 2022. Biggest lesson we've learned in 2021. You guys can take this however you want. Chet, I guess I'll go with you. We're talking whether it be how you set a lineup, whether it be just fantasy football or the NFL in general. Is there one big lesson you as a manager can share with other managers who listen to this podcast that is something we learned about the season that you're probably going to factor into next year?
Care less.
I feel like that's a life lesson.
It can pay off just to roll with who you draft and, just check your lineups on Sunday morning. Whatever you have on your bench, just throw in there. It's a championship formula. It really is. No, for things to learn, I think, a lot of the things that we always preach on this podcast really came to fruition. Making sure you have the proper handcuffs. Guys like Justin Jackson going off. How about Rashad Penny?
Patterson.
If you'd kept Rojo, even though he got hurt near the end, like a lot of those guys, football's a brutal sport. And if you make sure you have those backups who can come in and deliver, Jared Patterson, if you had Antonio Gibson in a championship, making sure you have those guys on your bench. The running back position is so brutal. And so we saw a lot of names that we maybe didn't expect deliver championship performances in these playoffs. So I think that's the biggest thing to take forward is, you're not going to land the top 5 running backs every year. If you do random snake order or wherever you are in your draft, don't give up just because you don't get the CMCs, the Dalvin Cooks, the Jonathan Taylors. Make sure you could even if you don't get one of those guys, maybe steal a handcuff in later in the draft just because you don't have Dalvin Cook. You know what? I'm going to get Alexander Madison because there's a good chance that Cook goes down. Or that's probably the thing I'm just going to is reconfirm for me is that the running back position is so volatile, and that if you have these guys, the offenses that are good, the good offensive lines, looking at the Cleveland Browns, whoever's back there, whether it's Dearness Johnson, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, like if those guys are healthy and in, there's a good chance they're going to be able to put up some points. So that's probably the biggest thing for me.
I've actually got three little things. The first one that I'll start with is look at intangibles. I think my number one running back at the beginning of this year was Nick Chubb. And when you look at what makes Nick Chubb successful, we know he's a super talented back. We know the backfield's crowded, but that offensive line can run the damn ball. So when you're drafting, really take a second to look at the intangibles. I mean, we also thought Baker Mayfield was going to have a huge step forward this year, and he didn't, which I think hurt some of the value there. But those are intangibles that you can't pass up. If you've got a good run game and you have a good pass game, that only increases value. If you have a strong running back and a bad offensive line, it's gonna hurt that running back. So I think you got to look at some of the intangibles. Number two, don't go with trying to stack a position sometimes. Like I said, I made that mistake in my one league. We talked so much about the running back position being so valuable this year. And I made a decision. 3 out of my top 4 draft picks were running backs. I went running back, wide receiver, running back, tight end. Then finally got my quarterback, and then got my second wide receiver, which legitimately cost me a championship. So make sure that you are looking at best available in all options, and not setting yourself up for that, because you can grab those handcuffs, because you can get some of those backups, and really just don't overdo it in a position, and trying to think like, oh, now I got trade value and I'm going to be setting my flex because all three, and no, it doesn't work. It ate me alive this year. And the third thing, 2 IR spots in a league is a must. We are in an era of football where obviously COVID's a thing. And if COVID continues next year, 2 IR spots it needs to be a requirement. But also, when you look at what's going on in the NFL, these dudes are getting faster, bigger. People are going out. We now have a 17-game season. I fully expect at some point to see a Josh Allen's being rested this week because they're playing the Jets, and it's the middle of the season, just to get an extra week of rest. He's out. Throw them on the bye so you can get a. If you're a fantasy manager in the current state of the NFL, in the current world we live in, please add a second IR spot. Not only does it make life a lot easier, but it just makes sense with the current situations of fantasy football, in my opinion.
Yeah, just call it the COVID spot. I think that's totally fair. That it's been really one of our biggest storylines all season of how to handle COVID situations. I don't think anybody in your league is going to complain of, okay, if you all get a COVID spot, somebody really good's not going to hit the waiver wire for a dumb reason. Somebody's always going to have their lineup filled for every week, and no one can complain about that. The COVID spot, the second IR spot, whatever you want to call it, I think it's totally cool. And then I think we've all kind of gone to the same spot here with running backs. I mean, just here are some of the names, right? Like my lesson is, I don't care if it's your team or somebody else's. Do not get excited about running backs anymore, like at all. Like on draft day, you might be like, oh, they got so-and-so and so-and-so. Here are the names. Top 15 finishers: James Conner, Cordero Patterson, Damian Harris, both Williams, one in Denver, one in Kansas City. Are we kidding? Like, those are top 15 running backs. We're not even talking about the rushing leaders, right? Like, if we get to the rushing leaders, we're going to have likely 5 guys who get over 1,000 yards, depending on what happens. The other names: Elijah Mitchell. I feel like we only talked about him for a month. He's in that conversation. Melvin Gordon, we thought his career might be over. Like, the excitement for running backs can't happen anymore. That is the biggest lesson that I've learned in 2021. That even though you think you got 2 stacked ones, they're not going to get you as many points as they used to. Or we could do like the whole value, like you really need running backs. At one point, we could just criticize and be like, they're just not as valuable anymore. They're just not week in and week out putting up the points like they used to 10, 15, or 20 years ago in fantasy.
The part that hit me about that, guys, and it pisses me off because that is all we talked about at the start of the season. Derrick Henry has the 6th most rushing yards in the NFL still. It's so infuriating. It's so infuriating.
My buddy Ben Prez, who finished second in one of our leagues, we used to mock him for one of his quotes, and now it's more and more fun every year that the leagues we play in are point scorers leagues, which no shit, they're point scorer leagues. Like that's what fantasy football is, dude. Everybody's trying to score as many points. But the point he makes is I don't care where my points come from. I don't care if I have 4 wide receivers. I don't care if I have an okay court. All I want is points. And that means I got to play with 2 bad running backs and I'm going to get points from 8 other spots. That's all I care about. I don't have to put value on a certain position. I put value on points, which sounds like a very obvious statement, but it really isn't when you start diving deeper into matchups and everything else, which kind of leads to this next story. And I know we're super far away from it, looking at 2022. If that even changes the way you draft, look, so many variables, I get that, but just drafting strategies. And before you answer that, I'll tell you about our friends at Mohawk Honda. New year, new ride could be on the way for you. Stop into Mohawk Honda and find out the selections of vehicles. How about this? I actually just got a text on my phone during this podcast from my guy, Cam McKenna, talking about the new Pilot on the way for me in 2022. Make the changes for you coming up this year. And don't forget to join us at Mohawk Honda, Levac and I, Thursday, January 13th from 4 to 5:30. We'll be broadcasting live from Mohawk Honda, our first time being there in Glenville, on location in 2022. And you can find out about the inventory, the selection of vehicles, work with great people like Brian McKenna, Cam McKenna, Greg Johnson. Our guy Nate was just hitting us up, making sure all the social media stuff is good to go. The weather is still wonderful here, knock on wood, in upstate New York. But once the weather starts to change, is your vehicle ready to make sure it's ready for those winter months? If not, now's the time. Mohawk Honda in Glenville. Get ready for a new year and a new ride for you in 2022. Where they always go out of their way to please you. Drafting. Guys, I know it's so far away. The mocks are, is it just something in your mind clicking like, okay, I made a huge mistake. I regretted it. I think, Kyle, you might have already said this, something that you regretted early on. Just to reset that again, like, what would you have done different in that strategy you laid out? You were too focused position rather than score.
Yeah, so my biggest thing this year was I was terrified of the running back position because we talked about it at length, the steep drop off after you got past some of those tier 1 and tier 2 running backs. So I went running back, wide receiver, running back, quarterback. So like you can't do that. And your buddy makes a good point. It's like sometimes you got to go with who's going to get you the most points. And obviously we know quarterbacks are the most points, but exclude the quarterback. If you're telling me if I look back and I could have got my RB1, then my wide receiver 1, then my RB2 and my wide receiver 2, I'm doing that in the blink of an eye. I'm not even hesitating because it screwed me this year. Having Cortland Sutton as my second wide receiver, and then my other wide receivers that I went with were trying to were prayers at a second year breakout with Henry Ruggs, and I already forgot his name in Philadelphia, opposite of
Jalen Reagor.
Yeah, Reagor. I gambled and it did not pay off. So no, I am going with filling my positions. I'm also big on what Chet said because obviously I talked a little bit about the injuries and the IR spots and everything like that. You got to get handcuffs for your top three people in all honesty. And I know Chet's huge on the depth with like having all those extra bodies, but I think it's so undervalued sometimes with those handcuffs. And Chet kicked my ass because I didn't have the right handcuff this year. So kind of those two things. I think that's what I look at when I'm drafting is I got to look at filling the correct spots versus trying to go with almost like a strategy game of, I'm going to have the 3 running backs and I won't be impacted by much. No, you're still going to be impacted because I got my ass kicked at my wide receiver 2 every single week.
Stephon Diggs dropped the touchdown on Sunday. That also cost me the championship. It went right through his hands. So, I know it was snowing, but it went right through his effing hands.
So, real quick, not on the drafting topic. Buffalo, put a dome on it.
Yeah, seriously.
Sorry.
I mean, props for them for being, I don't know if you want to call it arrogant or stubborn, but God, did they just keep chucking it. And there's a lot of drops in that game. But the one, do you guys know what I'm talking about? I think he was on a slant.
Oh, yeah. It was a beautiful slant.
4 yards out and just like right through the wickets. And that would have got me a championship. Yeah, I'm over it. I'm fine. It's okay. I'm going to move on. I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night just screaming Dontrell Hilliard. Yeah, no, I think a lot of the stuff that we talked about in the preseason, it happened, and I think when you look at if you're creating your own, cheat sheet for your draft and you're ranking the running backs and you're in that top 5 conversation of draft picks, you really have to look at, okay, what's the worst case scenario? What am I going to do if Derrick Henry gets hurt again? And we've been able to see that now where it's really a committee. And I think it's, not Donta Hightower, Deontay Foreman has kind of emerged as very similar looking to Derrick Henry and being able to be the bruiser that Tennessee loves. But we saw a lot this year when Dalvin Cook went down, how valuable a guy like Alexander Mattison is. When Kamara went down, not so much. At first it was Tony Jones and then Mark Ingram, and they're not the same kind of guy as an Alvin Kamara. So when you're deciding between who you want in that first round, play the scenario of what happens if this guy goes down. Who should I be targeting later in my rounds to handcuff? And will that handcuff actually be able to deliver? I think we saw it this year where if Austin Eckler is still the main guy for the Chargers next year, I'm not sure what his contract looks like, or I don't think he's that old. I think he's still
no, he's not that old. If I'm not mistaken, he signed a contract 2 years ago, so I think he's got a couple years left on it.
Okay, so but now we know where if Eckler goes down, Justin Jackson is more than capable of being a guy that could help your team. So I think that's one of the big ones. Again, I think we were confirmed again that don't reach on quarterbacks. The people that reached for Patrick Mahomes, how'd that work out? There was a big lull in the middle of the season, and guys who were probably still available after the 7th, 8th round, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, Matthew Stafford, who did have a couple of bad weeks in there for sure. But a lot of these guys put up similar numbers. And we saw Patrick Mahomes come back down to earth. Kyler Murray came back down to earth after he got injured. So Josh Allen is the only one that really lived up to the hype of a guy that was drafted early and finished as QB1 and played really well down the stretch. But for the most part, you're going to pass up on really valuable RBs or wide receivers when you can almost for sure get a strong quarterback. How about Joe Burrow? I mean, that guy was absolutely available in the 10th round or later, and he's been arguably the best quarterback in the fantasy postseason. So I never really reach for quarterbacks. And again, I think we do have 10 to 12 great fantasy options at the QB position on a week in, week out basis.
Chet, I think you bring up an insane point about the quarterback position because you even talked about hey, Josh Allen even lived up to hype. Josh Allen also probably cost you a couple games with his 9-pointer, his 16-pointer, and his 11-point performance, all happening in the second half of the season. So,
wait, sorry, who'd you say?
Josh Allen.
Yeah.
So, those are 3 games that are in the back half of the season. Now, granted, his last 4 playoff games, 35, 21, 31, and 21. But again, I love the fact that you were talking about reaching out a quarterback doesn't make sense in a lot of cases because I drafted Josh Allen, I think, in the 5th or 6th round because I had him as a keeper. And I was happy with it. But when I look back, I go, Josh Allen was literally QB1. I think the difference of QB1 and QB2 was 1 point. And QB2 probably could have been taken in the 7th, 8th round because I think it ended up being Burrow, obviously because these last 2 games. But I think that's an underrated point, too, of when you're looking at drafting is stop getting a quarterback in the first and honestly, even as early, I think the 5th round is the earliest you even look at taking a quarterback.
But to the people listening out there, keep drafting them early. Just don't let me worry about it. Let me get the RB2 and the wide receiver 2. You go get your Patrick Mahomes. Do it. Love it.
I'm fascinated by if in the 2022 drafts, if backup players, like you guys have mentioned a bunch of them already, if they actually go higher than the top 8, 9, 10, 11 quarterback. You know what I mean? In the 6th round, is that too high to draft a backup? Is the 8th round too fast to draft somebody you think might play? Because it goes back to the classic thing we talked about again in the summer. Go back and listen to those podcasts too about the classic phrase, minimize risk in fantasy. If a guy's got an injury, if a guy might be suspended, if a player's offense is different, minimize risk in your lineup. That's one of the great things, best piece of advice we could ever give in fantasy. But what's going to happen?
Listen to our takes on Tannehill. Just ignore those.
That's right. The best thing you can do is like, okay, this is a strategy I've used, and now some of my fellow people I compete against are going to have it. But what I've done different over the last few years in comparison to the past is I draft for September. And what I mean is that, like, if my team has a bunch of backups or a bunch of handcuffs and they're not going to get my lineup, there's a chance they might get my lineup in mid-October when the buys hit. But if I'm 1-4, it won't matter. I got to dig myself out of a hole, and I got to do it with backup players. It can happen, but it's very difficult. But if you draft the best potential teams for those matchups from week 1 to week 5, and you're at 4-1, and then shit hits the fan, you might be able to piece together. So, like, I guess I got to still stick with that strategy of draft for September, which some people hate because it's like, oh, guys, you're going to lose your whole – I could. But, like, that's what I'm so fascinated by, is that even somebody like me who drafts with that first 5-week mentality of, okay, here's my lineup, I don't know if I can do that anymore because I might have to reach on these backups so much sooner. So I got at least somebody giving me points when injuries, COVID, bad matchups, or what we just saw, reps. Like, people just get the ball more than ever before.
I think for the question about when should you target a handcuff, my rule of thumb is make sure I've already drafted my starting lineup, excluding defense and kicker. So, like, I'm not going to take a handcuff before I have a tight end or a quarterback. Like, I want to make sure I have those because I know, like you say, drafting for September, I know my week 1 lineup is going to be okay. But once I have those solidified and I'm deciding between, all right, let me make sure I get my bench receiver, I might lean more towards making sure I have that handcuff as opposed to a guy who's going to sit on my bench for most of the year because he's not going to crack the lineup over my wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2. Sure. And one other point I want to make about something that I've learned this year, maybe we got to start reaching a little higher on rookies. You know, we all knew, and the Jamar Chase one is really interesting this preseason because if you were paying close attention, there was an Instagram rumor. I think it is confirmed it was his baby mama on Instagram who made a claim. And I had people really worried about, is he going to be in a domestic violence case? And we know how the NFL handles those now. So I think that deterred a lot of people. And he had the issue of dropping some passes in the preseason. He came out and said it's hard to see the NFL football. So there was a lot of things that were stacked against Jamar, even though we knew how talented the player was. But he wasn't the only one. You know, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Elijah Moore, before he got injured, was putting up some ridiculously big numbers. So the guys that had a lot of the preseason rookie hype really delivered and might have won you a championship. And those guys were likely on the board late in your drafts. And as opposed to waiting on those guys, like when you're making the decision later in your draft, let's say after the 6th round, and you're trying to fill that bench, I might lean more away from the veterans who we know have a low ceiling, you know, like guys that you're like, oh, he's okay. You know, like he might get me a few points here and there. No, maybe roll the dice a little bit on some of these guys that could end up being superstars. I don't think Devontae Smith delivered in that sense, but Jamar Chase, my goodness, like, and that's now 2nd year in a row where if you had reached on Justin Jefferson, if you had reached on Jamar Chase, like those guys went from being drafted in the bench rounds to being your wide receiver 1. And so go for the guys that have the potential to have huge upside as opposed for the safer picks that you know you've already seen for a few years.
2 things, Chet. 1, just be careful how you address that your week 1 lineup is set, especially when it's coming from you.
Yeah.
So just want to throw that one out there.
Yeah.
And 2, Chet, can you imagine if you're in a Dynasty League and you drafted Justin Jefferson last year and Jamar Chase this year? Woo! You literally have wide receiver 1, and you still have picks 1 through 8. Oh my God.
Could you imagine if they were on the same team together?
No, let's not.
I mean, they were. And that's how we saw a record-setting team at LSU.
All right, this is one of the few times in the history of this podcast we're probably not going to offer up any Week 18 bold predictions because next week's the playoffs, guys. Like, if you don't have a team in the NFL playoffs, and we will continue this podcast through the Super Bowl like we've done in the past because some people's favorite squads aren't in it and you need something to root for. So daily fantasy selections are coming, a little turn in the podcast. So week to week, setting lineups, all that stuff is on the way. But I'm thrilled for week 18. I'm rooting. And Kyle, I'm going to give this to you to close out the podcast. Do we all want Bills Patriots an expanded wild card week? Is that the matchup we all want to see? Because I know I'm rooting for it.
I'm all in for a Bills Patriots. I would enjoy that matchup very much so, especially if the weather's decent. If the weather's bad, I'm going to be a miserable prick sitting at Highmark Stadium if the Bills get the home game. Honestly, I don't know. I'm more rooting for the doomsday scenario of Chargers, Raiders tie, Steelers win, and the Colts lose. So the Colts get kicked out, and I get to play the Raiders with two home games in the playoffs and pray that Tennessee loses. Also, Derrick Henry sitting on the sideline. I do not want to see you in January.
But come on, they have Dontrell Hilliard. Fucking A.
I think you had 5 more times to say Dontrell Hilliard, by the way. I'm pretty sure I kept that count right.
It's a Beetlejuice scenario. He's going to pop up a few more times on the podcast. We're going to invite him into the call all of a sudden. Chet, what's on your belated Christmas list? Kyle just laid out a good few gifts he wants still. What are you hoping for the NFL playoffs when we reconnect next week?
I want to say something mean about Dontrell Hilliard, but I'm going to let it pass. I don't want to root for anything bad to happen to someone, but I hope he stubs his toe. No, I'm just excited. I thought it was going to be a little bit more crazy of a final week, just in terms of real football. But a lot of it got determined in week 17. I'm with Kyle. I hope there's chaos. I hope the Colts somehow lose to the Jaguars, even though Trevor Lawrence might be the worst prospect that everyone was wrong about. Like, how bad is he?
Horrible.
Real bad.
Horrible is Trevor Lawrence. My goodness, the guy stinks. But no, I just hope it's going to be, an exciting final week of football. I'm glad that most teams are going to have to play their starters, and we get to see hopefully another fun and exciting week of football.
I'm very happy my team has Tom Brady, because watching him go down the field against the Jets was
Oh my God,
great.
we didn't even mention AB.
I guess we'll save that for next week.
I'll just say this.
No, we'll do it. We'll do it. Right now. There you go. Kyle's doing an impression of it.
Kyle's stripping. Please do it. I feel bad for anybody that started Antonio Brown and watched a fantasy starter run away in the third quarter. Oh my goodness. One quick thing. Someone say something for the next 15 seconds.
Don't need Antonio Brown. Glad the Buccaneers dumped him. It was one of the wildest things. I want to say I've never seen that before in my lifetime, but it's actually not true, because I think I might have shared the story in this podcast before. The first Bills game I ever had gone to was Bills Chargers 4 years ago.
Davis.
And Vontae Davis retired at halftime. So I was at that game. So I can't even say it's the first time I've ever seen anything like that.
Never mind. Mike Williams did not crack the top 10 even after that log touchdown. Wide receiver 15.
All right, boys.
Damn it. I want to see guys go AB.
Next week, playoffs, and I'll have my shirt on for everybody. Congratulations. All right, see you guys next week.
Later.